This episode of Bright Hearth is brought to you by Garlands of Grace and our supporters at patreon.com.
For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Ephesians 5:23. This is the reason assigned why wives should be obedient. Christ has appointed the same relation to exist between a husband and a wife as between himself and his church. This comparison ought to produce a stronger impression on their minds than the mere declaration that such is the appointment of God. Two things are here stated. God has given to the husband authority over the wife, and a resemblance of this authority is found in Christ, who is the head of the church, as the husband is of the wife. Excerpt from page 318 of John Calvin's Commentary on Galatians and Ephesians, translated by William Pringle.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Bright Hearth. Brian and Lexy are hanging out here today in our usual comfy, cozy nest, our bed.
We're back in the bed. Because
after our recent reviews, I don't know if we should say that.
Oh my word. You guys seriously go read some of our reviews recently.
People
You'll
really
know which one we're talking
can't
about.
handle the fact that sometimes husbands and wives actually like each other.
We do.
They think you're disgusting and
listeners.
toxic.
We like to flirt. Anyway, we'll keep it. We keep it PG. We keep it PG.
Jeez Louise, yeah.
So in this episode, babe, we are talking about how to make big decisions without killing each other. And I chose that cold open from John Calvin commenting on Ephesians 5 because a lot of what we're going to talk about actually does come back to this question of leadership, submission, who's making big decisions and calls. And actually, the next couple episodes, there will be a little bit of a through line on some of these things. In today's episode specifically, we're talking about one of the most important aspects of Christian marriage, which is making decisions together. And we're talking especially about big decisions, emotional decisions, or decisions that feel like they have a lot of weight riding on them.
Yeah.
We've had those.
We're not talking about where you're going to go eat.
No, though that can sometimes be a source of,
yeah, well.
What do you want for dinner? I don't know. Well, what about pizza? No, not that. I'm up for anything. What about Mexican, Italian, French?
That's an opportunity for discipleship also, I guess.
No, yeah, you're right, though. We are talking about big decisions here. We're talking about the kinds of decisions that, sometimes your wife is in tears about or you guys stay up anxious about. Things like moving. Should we move churches? Should we move states? Should I change jobs? Should I drop out of college or stay in college? Should we have more children? Should we educate the children in private school? Should we use this homeschooling curriculum? Should we make this decision with a medical event? It's things like that really bring the testing point of, do you understand how a husband and wife are to relate and how they can each help and serve one another in these things, and how the biblical patterns that God has established actually do give a lot of safety and comfort.
Yeah.
So the inspiration for this episode is actually something we are in the thick of ourselves. I mean that like we are in the thick of it. We're in the middle of it. And it's a pregnancy-related issue, medical decisions, things like that. And I'm not going to get into a bunch of the details here. We actually are going to do an episode of In the Kitchen, which is our patron-exclusive podcast. If you like to support the show and also get a lot of other resources that we put out with each main episode, we record a short patron-exclusive podcast called In the Kitchen, where we give practical advice, lots of other things, sometimes related to the episode, sometimes not. The In the Kitchen today is actually going to be walking through this decision that we've had to make in a little bit more detail and kind of using it as a case study for the topic of this episode. So you can sign up. There's a link in the description there if you're interested in hearing about that. And also getting a Feed the Patriarchy mug, which
we do have people ask us all the time, what does your process look like when you have to make a medical decision? So this is a perfect example of someone opting into the conventional model.
Yes.
Somewhat.
Yeah. Ooh, mysterious. So anyway, that was the inspiration for this episode. But it made me begin to think that this is really a common feature of marriage. We're talking about marriage as the heart of the productive Christian household. And it's also an area where there's a lot of conflict, or often where there's difficulty, and where husband and wife can get off the same page, and then everything kind of becomes not only anxious about the decision you have to make, but you're just like at odds with one another.
Yeah.
And that doesn't help.
Yeah, no.
So the first thing that I wanted to talk about, babe, if you're up for it, is just to talk about some of the basic sort of ways that this can go wrong, some of the points of conflict and tension. And I think that will help us zero in on some principles that are helpful in this topic. And then we'll talk more positively about those principles at the end a little bit more. So,
okay.
The first question I have is for you. And it's basically the question of what can a husband do for his wife to help her in the midst of a difficult decision? What are some of the things that he can do to make it easier on his wife when there are these big emotional lot riding on them kinds of decisions to make in the family?
A couple of things come to mind. I think one of them is just asking her, how does she feel? Because I think sometimes if maybe some husbands are like less to be emotionally intellectual maybe, and they might just like not even think to ask, or they might also feel so overwhelmed that they're not checking in on their wife maybe. Mm-hmm. So just not saying that the husband has to have the answer, but is he at least getting a pulse on where she's at? And I guarantee you, if your wife is trying to be self-controlled and to not be an emotional burden, she's probably going to be slow to share some of that.
Yeah.
I try to do that. I try not to be overly emotional and overly talkative about things. But part of that is because I trust you and I know that we will talk about it eventually.
Sure.
But just a husband being inquiring is helpful. I think too, we've talked about this in regards to marriage, but I think when it comes to a lot of these decisions, it could potentially be helpful for a husband to even set boundaries for the wife, like who she should and shouldn't talk to about this.
That's a good point. Who to seek advice from even.
Yeah. I feel like you're fairly trusting of me when it comes to different things, like where you know why I'm going to seek advice from different types of people. You know that I do that regularly. But some women who might be extremely fretful might be very quick to talk to the wrong sort of people just because she wants a sympathetic ear maybe.
Yeah.
So obviously like prayer needs to be the number one thing. And so I think sometimes for women, it's actually a good discipline to not talk to somebody quickly and to pray about it first. But then have a wise counsel surrounding you, I guess.
Yeah.
Of people that are actually helpful, that aren't just going to, pat you on the back and reinforce what you already believe about the situation.
Yeah.
When we've had marriage things in the past, we've kind of said this with one another, like, who are the two couples that we're both comfortable with being 100% open and honest and transparent with?
Yeah.
Because we're not comfortable with just doing that to the average person. But I think that's also really helpful when it comes to a lot of these other issues too.
Yeah, that's great. The husband needs to be giving his wife, it sounds like, permission, like an invitation. Hey, I know we're making this big decision about the kids' education with our homeschooling curriculum, our plan. Things that are going to set the course for the next 12 years or like a lot of time, it might feel like. How are you feeling about it? Am I doing a good enough job? Can I help you? Is there anything that I need to give you to help? Are you stressed about something that I can speak to? A husband who does that, I think, can head off like 80% of these problems.
Yeah.
So he's insofar as it's up to him. I mean, where he's now given the invitation, and he can, if later it's like it turns out that she was super anxious and is freaking out later, he can say, "Well, I asked you. Like, I gave you the invitation. Please take it when I asked you." Certainly. So on the other side, what can a wife do to help her husband on this front? I think one thing that I would say is that it's important for, this really goes both directions, but I think it's very important for husbands and wives to understand how each person is different. And just in general, the ways that men and women approach problems is going to be different. And each of them can leave you open to misunderstanding that is actually unintentional. So if a husband doesn't realize that his wife just is naturally wired, at least a lot of ladies will struggle much more with decision paralysis, anxiety surrounding decisions, and feeling like the whole world is on her shoulders. So a husband needs to understand that one of the gifts that he needs to give his wife is strong, present leadership on these questions. I think that one of the ditches that I've fallen in before in our marriage, especially early on as I was figuring this out, is on decisions where you had been sort of given the lead, like, okay, we're thinking about this education curriculum and you're going to be homeschooling. This was before we started the school. So I want you to go look into these things, come up with a plan, and then we'll talk about it. Well, one of the things that resulted in is that you had often done a lot of research on some of these things. I was too slow sometimes to get involved and make a call. And so it put a lot of weight on your shoulders if I was always saying, hey, yeah, what do you think? You just do this. You've looked into it. I haven't. Check it out. And sometimes I think a wife needs her husband to actually go make the call, to just step in and say, okay, that's great. We've now explored it. I'm going to take the pressure off of you. I'm just going to make the call.
Well, and I think this is, in some ways, this is where productive households comes back into place.
Yeah.
Because I feel like you're more educated about every decision we make now than maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Because you understand it's not the government's job to make that decision for me. Education, medical, anything. Yeah. So now you understand you have to be able to make an informed decision, which means you have to be informed. But I do think some guys can be quick to put that all on the wife and to not do the equal part of researching this for themselves.
Yeah.
And that isn't helpful because the wife, what naturally happens is the wife feels defensive about everything that she's doing. She has to be defensive to her friends, to her parents, to the doctors, to the school board. Like, she's naturally on the defense, and that's not where a woman should be. A woman should be defended. So I do think that's where, like, dads really have to kind of take back. You guys were talking about this on the King's Hall. Like, why weren't there any dads at that school board, or more dads at that school board, rather?
It's very common to see in education specifically, dad completely checked out, mom obsessed.
Yes.
So you get moms who spend hours and hours and weeks and months
and
researching.
And that's not good for mom to be obsessed.
And getting really, really strong, pointed opinions about every particular thing related to the philosophy of education, curriculum, et cetera. And the dad has no idea what's going on. He's completely disconnected. No philosophy of education, no theology of education. Just hasn't thought it through, and it's all on his wife. And that can lead to decision paralysis, anxiety for his wife. It can also lead to inappropriately domineering relationship between husband and wife, where he is seated actually something, and not in the way we've talked about already in this season, where a husband can and should deploy his wife as his most powerful deputy in many areas of her domain, which is the home, keeping the home and oikodespot type of work. She's to be his strongest helper, best advisor, all of that in his home. He can deploy her for things, but he needs to maintain a handle on what's going on, particularly with these big decisions. Another area I think this can happen is health things, where a husband just lets his wife sort of go completely down the road of becoming obsessed with different health theories or philosophies or diets or, home birth stuff or whatever, and he's totally checked out. And so he's not even in a position to evaluate whether his wife is falling prey to woo-woo or to nonsense, or even just to have an intelligent conversation with her about these things.
Just basic wisdom.
He needs to make sure that he stays abreast enough when it is the case that she's doing some of the frontline research, which is fine. It happens. He still needs to make sure that he's maintaining a handle on what's going on in that process and not just leaving it all up to his wife. And I think I've mentioned a couple times, like early in our marriage, I think this happens a lot. Husbands and wives are both immature, like especially when you're young.
Yeah.
You're figuring out a lot of life stuff. And it's just easy out of laziness or not wanting to be too domineering for husbands, I think, in immaturity, to not be proactive enough in keeping abreast of these kinds of decisions. This episode of Bright Hearth is sponsored by Garlands of Grace, which is a wonderful Christian company that offers a variety of very versatile head coverings, head wraps, and headbands for sale for women and girls. They're very versatile. Whether you're head covering for 1 Corinthians 11 reasons or just looking for a pretty and feminine head covering, they've got you covered. Babe, why do we like Garlands of Grace?
I really liked Garlands of Grace because when I was first trying to recover this call to head cover, I didn't necessarily want something that was super trendy and that everyone else was doing. And I found their pieces really feminine and timeless in a way that just a lot of other coverings that you could pick up at Target or on Amazon just weren't. And they are very quality. And if you are a mom trying to cover in a pew with wiggly children, you know how hard it is to actually keep a head covering on.
Yes.
And I really like their volumizer bands that are velvet and they stick to your head, and I have had no issues with them. So yeah, I really like them. And they're a sister-owned company.
Yeah, Christian-owned, sister-owned, and they're all made in the USA. So a great company to support. We would commend you, husbands, if you're listening. Go check this out as a thoughtful gift for your wife, for your daughters. They have head wraps for ladies as well as little girls. And they've got a whole lot of different styles, a lot of different beautiful colors, and really great quality company. So we're glad to have them as a sponsor for this episode of Bright Hearth, and you can support us by supporting them. So head over to garlandsofgrace.com. You can use the link in the description of this episode, and we hope that you'll give them your support. So one thing I would say, we're actually going to talk about this a little bit more in next week's episode, Lord willing, is just this making the call, where a husband has to understand that he actually has the duty to lead the family. And so at the end of the day, even if his wife makes a call, he is responsible for the call.
Yeah.
So if he can't put his name on it, then there's something wrong. If he's not aware enough of the issues, whether it's moving or medical things or health or whatever, for him to be able to say, yes, my wife definitely did a lot of thinking on this and I trust her and she made a call here on education or curriculum or whatever, but I'm aware enough that I could explain and defend the decision.
Yep, he can,
because he's going to answer for it.
Yep.
It's his children, his house, his domain. Let's talk about some ways this commonly goes wrong here. Because I think that there are particular ways that this can go wrong from the perspective of wife or a husband. Let's start with the wife and just say, what are some ways that a wife can sin or err when it comes to making big decisions and make things harder or just generally be disobedient to the Lord?
I do think lacking in self-control, like being overly excessively weepy about things. Or
yes,
Nancy has said, I think
Nancy Wilson.
Yeah, Nancy Wilson said, I don't remember where, but I remember her basically saying, like, if you're so anxious about something that you're not getting your basic duties done because of it, you know you're in sin. And that's always really helped me have a pulse on, am I so distracted and anxious that I can't even get dinner ready because I'm just sad and like crying and I want to just talk to people about it and, you know.
You need to ask for help.
Yeah.
You need to get resolution on that quick, to the degree that it's not like something is totally out of everybody's control, and sometimes things knock you down.
Yeah.
But if it's just for sure.
Yeah. So I just think that is one where it's just like excessive fretfulness.
Yeah. Excessive emotional fretfulness, anxiety. What about, would you agree, I think one of the ways that a wife can commonly fall into error here is by being really opinionated and not submissive to her husband.
Yeah.
So that when he makes a call that she might not fully be on board with something, it's like she's going to punish him. It's going to be a huge problem.
She doesn't trust her husband.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's important to what you said earlier in this episode about there being safety within submission.
Yeah.
Because for me, I've always thought or prayed in terms of like, which rarely happens, that I disagree with you, but there is lack of safety when you are going around your husband's decision. So you should be scared.
Yeah, because the instruction is to submit to your husband.
Yeah. And some of this, like, we're not materialists. So some of this work is still supernatural and it won't always make the most sense to us. So yeah, like, trust your husband, and in doing so, you're entrusting yourself to the Lord, and there is safety in that.
Yeah, an example would be, I'm going to give you an easy one, I think, for most of our listeners. Like, let's say that a lady had been, she knows, okay, I'm in charge of putting food on the table for my family and cooking and making dinner and packing lunches, and I've listened to some podcasts and I've gone through some blogs, and I'm convinced that veganism is the only way to eat healthy. And so I need to protect my family, my kids, not poison them with meat products. And I'm going to serve all vegan food from now on. And let's say her husband hears that, she says, this is what I'm going to do. And he, thinks about it, and he's nice and kind and he's not a huge jerk about it. And he just says, honey, you're wrong. That's not healthy. And we're not going to be vegan. So I need you to cook meat for the family and for the kids. And you're not allowed to be vegan either.
And I really do think it's important with stuff like that for the husband to say, and you're not allowed to either, because I feel like there's still ways that the wife will undermine, because she's like, well, I'm at least in control of myself.
So what are some ways that she could hear that and sin? Because I think there's more than one way.
Okay.
Because it reveals some
I think anxiety is probably the biggest one.
Doing it, but then being continually anxious about it.
Yeah, being continually anxious about it. Yeah. Just being specifically, I guess this, like you said, it can create distance. So it can create lack of hospitality between husbands and wives. It can create bitterness. It can create frustration, lack of trust, like you've already said, which is why I think it's important for the husband to be able to give a defense at that point.
Yeah.
And not just be like, okay, that's it. You're not vegan. I have no reasoning.
Husband shouldn't be a jerk about it.
Because he has to be able to help her think through the sinful thought patterns there.
Should she listen to him and do what he says?
Yeah.
like the totally confused. My wife's so base that she's like, duh. I just want it to be explicit, because some people don't actually think that. They go, he should not. Who does he think he is?
Her body, her choice.
Her body, her choice. Yeah, I mean, he maybe he can be vegan, but the kids and her, like, oh, he can't. It's her health decision. No, she should obey her husband.
Well, and she has to understand that's raising the ante for him, because it means he has to be making a wise decision. He has to be equipped to lead her well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So another example might be you're going through some kind of health decision. Let's say birth of a child, and the wife is, she subscribes to 16 crunchy blogs, and she's like, unassisted home birth or bust. And, if we don't do that, then we're pretty much sinning, And he says, I'm going to think about that. Let's talk. Let's come to a conclusion. He says, no, I don't believe that. Actually, I think we should have a hospital birth.
Oh, so they're on total opposite ends of the spectrum.
I'm putting up a big old, this is a worst case scenario. Not really. They're both Christians, not unbeliever, that kind of thing. What should she do?
Okay, I think she should say, I'm willing to submit to you. Can you give me your reasoning? Like, can I have you read about? I think it's okay to ask more questions.
Yes, me Lord.
At that point.
Can you explain your thinking behind this?
Correct, yes.
Would you be willing to read this book?
Yes, correct. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
And I think he should be willing to do that. What if he reads a book, or he says, I've read a book, and she says, well, I know you still disagree. Here's 3 more. And what if he says no?
In my mind, she should be equipped enough to understand how to navigate that system to the best of her.
The hospital thing?
Correct. Yeah. Like, if she's doing her due diligence as well, she should be able to make the best situation, especially as a Christian that can find joy, that should be able to find joy, even if supernaturally, in unideal circumstances for herself.
Yeah. So let's say they disagree about what ideal circumstances are, and he thinks the hospital is ideal.
Yeah.
I actually don't agree with him on this. That's why I'm using this example. But let's say that's the situation. What should she do at the end of the day when it comes to decision? She should go have a baby in the hospital and pray. Perfect.
Put on her head covering and pray.
I'm picking examples that are uncomfortable for probably lots of our listeners who are. Some of you guys are totally. I'm not belittling you if you believe in if you're pro, like you're not a home birth. That's we're not actually trying to make that the issue.
No,
I'm trying to get at the mechanics of the decision making here. Because that's the topic. If the husband at the end of the day makes the call, and I'm saying, your husband's a Christian, you trust him, he's, what does Scripture tell you? And we need to put a point on it, because a lot of ladies will do everything they can to wiggle around the point.
I wasn't trying to be vague there, sorry.
And the pointed reality is, wives, see that you respect your husbands, submit to him. And so what you're doing when you do that, ladies, in particular, I think it's important you understand this, especially where you don't think he's right.
Yeah.
Is that you're actually trusting the Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Not your husband. And you should trust your husband too. But let's say you disagree. without guile, without rancor, without nagging him, without turning it into a thing where you're going to be really rude to him for 2 weeks to get back at him for his decision you disagree with, kindly, with a smile, you submit to your husband. And the point is, what you're saying is, Lord, you told me to do this. I trust that even if this is not, quote, the right decision, that I still need to listen to him.
Yeah. That it's as simple as that.
Simple as. And obviously we're talking about, and I've picked examples that aren't sin issues. Yeah. It's not a sin to give a birth in a hospital. It's not a sin to have a home birth. So we're talking about wisdom calls, things that the scripture doesn't speak positively to. And obviously if your husband says, hey, honey, we're going to start using pornography together. You say, no, I have to obey the Lord, not men. And you still pray and you still do it respectfully, and you maybe appeal to your pastoral authority. Well, you should appeal to your pastoral authorities in that example. But this, we're not talking about those. We're talking about the hard decisions that are genuinely, they're like, these are wisdom calls.
Yeah.
And that's really hard. Like, I'm not a woman, so I've never been there, but I imagine that that's anxiety inducing. Not that we've ever disagreed about anything.
Never.
So I think that's a big area for sin, is for the wife to do everything she can to creatively get around simply submitting to her husband. And at some point, it needs to be without argument.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, I don't feel like I've ever had to do this necessarily, but if it might mean a wife stopping reading certain things, stopping listening to certain things, stopping talking to certain people, not because she doesn't agree with them or whatever, but because it's no longer helping her in her walk of obedience.
That's right. So if he says, like, look, we are not going to be vegan.
You need to quit hanging out with
stop
those vegan
reading
people.
15 vegan things every day, because your husband said we're not doing that. And so you need to stop making it harder for yourself. Like, go read some, I don't know, Narnia or something. Yeah, read some Narnia. They eat bacon in Narnia, but so they're not vegan in Narnia.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Let's go the other way, though.
Okay.
What are some ways that the husband might sin or make this harder for his wife in the context of making these calls? And I can give you one to start if
go ahead, because I feel like I already said what I thought about.
And we can say, I think saying it again would be okay. Like, one of them would be, you never listen to your wife. Yeah. She says, honey, I've been reading this. I've been thinking, I've been praying about this. I have a health thing that I think our family should do. I think we should start doing this. And he just says, nope, and never listens, never hears, never does any research. And he just has like completely immovable opinions on everything and will not consider his wife.
Especially if it's something that she is spending the bulk of her daily waking hours either navigating, thinking about, or like physically doing. Like, there's been issues with, not issues, but things we've had to decide about certain educational therapies with some of our children that I had to say, like, I need more help. I need you to research this more, because a lot of the time-wise, it falls on my calendar. Yeah. So I feel like in order for this to be just, you need to look into this more, because I'm having to mechanically work this out, and I don't agree with how it's going.
And sometimes that's meant me being home from work for a meeting or a call with a specialist, or coming to an appointment so I'm equipped to answer. And it's inconvenient. Like, when you have a busy work schedule and it's inconvenient for everybody. Working hard, nobody wants to have to do this. Yeah. But sometimes a husband has to say, I actually can't be at this thing. Yeah. I have duties.
And I think at that point, the way we handle that is, then I prioritize, okay, if you can't be at everyone, what about these two for this reason? Yeah. Which has worked really well for us. But then I can really respect, like, no, he knows. I know he knows. I know he's doing what he can. He's not just leaving me in the dust to deal with this 6 hours out of every week. Yep. Now I can fully lend my entire strength towards submitting to him.
Yes. So he needs to take interest and care. If he can't make it to the thing, he needs to say, well, okay, when you come back, I am going to listen to your summary of what happened. I'm going to be ready with questions. I have some things I want you to ask the specialist when you're there, or whatever it is. So that, and she can then tell, he's not just skipping out because he doesn't want to be there.
Yes.
He's making a call about priorities and schedule, which happens.
Correct. Yep.
So that's for sure one way a husband could go wrong. He's just not listening. He's not helping. He's just completely leaving his wife in the wind when it comes to these decisions. What are some other ways that you can think of that a husband can make it more difficult for his wife when it comes to making these calls together or the follow-up from making a call?
I think probably if he goes back on his word, like if he has to realize if he's going to entrust her with, he's not going to micromanage, he's going to entrust her with responsibility and authority, then in some ways, to be a good leader, he has to put up with the consequences of what she decides then. Yeah. He can't go back on something else and say, oh, I don't really like that. Why didn't you just do it like this? Then he kind of starts, it's effeminate. He's complaining at her.
Yeah.
Instead of taking the brunt of the consequences like he should be.
He's not, he's being the kind of leader who says, go do something. And then when they do it,
yes,
having done what you ask them, they fuss about everything.
It kind of takes the wind out of their sails. And therefore, why would you?
Love is to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So you have to think, like, if I were my wife and my husband said, okay, you're in charge of decorating. I'm going to use a silly example. You're in charge of decorating this room. Here's the budget. You have freedom. Go do it. Here's the things I absolutely hate. Please don't make it like egg pink or whatever. And a week later, he comes back and she says, "Oh, look what I did. I spent the budget. I came in under. It's beautiful." And he says, "I hate it all. Take it all down." That's just really rude. I mean, like he's not treating her the way he'd want to be treated. Obviously, bigger decisions too. If he's going to change his mind later, he should have a good reason, and he should explain that to his wife. And the goal is that you're always, when you're making the call, men, you want to win your wife to your call. And that doesn't mean if she's not won to the decision, you can't make the decision.
Yeah.
But you ought to be trying.
I think we've talked a lot about wives being low maintenance.
Yeah.
I do think there is such thing as like a tending towards hyper-patriarchy man who needs to learn to be low maintenance.
Like a high maintenance man.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just never pleased. He's always going back. He's fussing about every decision.
That's not masculine. It's not masculine.
Yeah, it's a man needs to be he needs to be a joyful, patient, understanding leader.
Yeah.
Who your goal is to make it easier for wife to follow. And ladies should never hear that and think, well, if my husband ever makes a decision I don't like, he's not being that because I don't like it. Well, no. That's not, you're not allowed to do that either. It goes both ways, and there needs to be a mutuality while still understanding that he can make a call and she needs to submit to him. That's what the scriptures just teach, and that's how God ordered his world, and it will go well if you do that, and that he needs to live with his wife in an understanding way, knowing that she is the weaker vessel, and that the Lord won't hear his prayers if he's being harsh and rude with her. And so you can sin just because a man can be harsh and rude never means a wife is free to be unsubmissive and anxious. And just because a wife can be unsubmissive and anxious doesn't mean a man is ever free to be harsh and rude. Both of them pursuing Christ together, love one another, and walk in their duties. It's glorious when that happens.
Yeah, sin does not cover sin.
That's right.
It's love that covers sin.
That's right. So, giving some final principles here, kind of summing up some of the things that we've said. There's obviously more that we could say in this episode. Men need to be present. They need to exercise present, active leadership in their home, meaning that they need to stay abreast of the major decisions of life to such an extent that they are able to direct and give an account for the calls that are made, for the decisions that are made.
Yep.
He shouldn't just be leaving his wife in the wind without cover, going and saying, make all the decisions, then I'm going to fuss about them. He shouldn't be arbitrarily making decisions having not done any thinking about them. She should know, she should be learning to trust that when he makes a decision, it's because he has thoughtfully engaged with it and he is attempting to make the best call for the family. And on the other side, wives, submit to your husbands, which means when you disagree with them on a wisdom call, you submit to them cheerfully. Do not nag him. Do not bring it up 50 times. Don't try to change his mind every day for the next 3 months. Do feel free to make a wise appeal and say, would you be in, this is so you can understand why I thought the other way. Can you read this book, see if it changes your mind, or help me understand why you still don't agree? Mm-hmm. And then you're asking your husband to be a masculine man. He's not going to, a good patient man should be like, oh, my wife respects me enough that she's even asking me to help understand why he disagrees. Like, this is good.
Yeah.
A husband needs to be careful not to zoom out all the time and be just completely disconnected with his duties, and then angry when his wife disagrees with him. A wife needs to make sure that she is not continually nagging him or making huge decisions independently of him. They need to work together to come to peace on these issues. And then at the end of the day, when the decision is made, both of you do your best before the Lord to walk in wisdom and to love one another through it. If he turns out to be wrong and have made the wrong call, it's essential for trust that he says, "Wow, I actually think I made the wrong call on this. You were right, or we made the wrong call on this. Let's pivot." And I think another one that's important, that's even more of a humble pill, is when the decision is made that the wife disagrees with, and she does all the respectful wife, submits to it, and 3 months later it's going really well. I think she should be willing to say, "Honey, you were right.
Right. Yeah.
You were right. That was a good call. Thank you for protecting our family and making that call."
Yeah. Oftentimes that's where the wife will abound in thankfulness.
Yes. So encouraging. When each one is doing this, it's so encouraging. There's so much peace and joy. And even hard decisions the husband can feel the proper weight that he's supposed to. The wife can feel the proper protection that she's supposed to.
Yeah.
And each of them, even if they end up making the wrong call, because we're not God, we're not omniscient, we're not all wise, he is. Sometimes we're going to make the wrong call. We can still rest in the fact that we were trying honestly before the Lord to make a good decision.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing I would add that we didn't talk about much, you did mention it, is seek wise counsel.
Yeah.
Ask your pastors. If you come to this sort of impasse, a wise husband will seek counsel from a more experienced man. He will seek counsel from his pastors. He'll say, "We're trying to make this decision," and genuinely listen to those other authorities too. Mm-hmm. It should give a man pause if his wife is like, "I really think this is the wrong decision, honey. I'm going to submit to whatever you decide." He should say, "Okay, that's a weighty thing.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ask Pastor so-and-so and see what he thinks." And a wife shouldn't, I'm always thinking, a wife should not then, "My husband didn't do that. I'm free to nag him and not submit." No. Still submit to him, even if he doesn't do it exactly how I just described. I want to head off all the ways people might try to use this episode to sin. Don't sin. That's the thing, you guys.
Don't sin.
Just don't sin. We have an advocate if you do, though. The Lord Jesus. Anything you'd add?
I don't think so.
Excellent. Well, listeners, before you sign out, I have some important notes to give you here. We do have our upcoming New Christendom Press Conference here in Ogden, Utah, June 8th to the 10th. And we actually have a patron discount right now. So if you sign up for Patreon and you support us, we will give you a hefty discount on a ticket to that conference. It's going to be a great time. We also added a few more clarifications on our ticketing policy. We have limited seats, so we're trying to make sure that we maximize those and do a good job in putting on a good conference and making sure that we have all our ducks in a row. But we did clarify that we have, with each adult ticket that's bought, 2 and under lap rider is free with each of those.
Stroller rider.
So if a husband and wife come together, it's just basically 2 and under. You get one 2 and under for free with each adult. And then also we added a very discounted ticket. It's like almost 70% off for kids that are older than that. To basically, then the reason that we're not just saying all kids are free, I know that we love kids, is because genuinely it would be difficult for us to actually
pull off the event,
pay for the event if we don't, and exist as a company if we don't charge something. So we have a kids ticket that's over that age, like under 18, over 2 years old or whatever ticket, that's heavily discounted there. So check that out. We'd love to have families come out. This would be a great event for a father to bring a son to, a 12, 13-year-old son or older. 8, 9 too would also be good. It'd be a great one for a husband and wife to come out if grandma and grandpa could hang with the kids for a weekend. It's that kind of thing. We'd love to have you join us on Sunday for church as well while you're here. But that's just it should be a really good time, and we're hoping that it will be edifying to you and also a great chance to make some good friendships. So, as always, thanks for listening to this episode of Bright Hearth, and we'll see you next time.